To say that this movie has made me feel quite angry, pardon the pun, has to be one of the biggest understatements of the freaking century. Film Buff 06 here, coming your way with my long-awaited and extremely belated review/rant for the 2016 computer-animated action-adventure comedy film The Angry Birds movie, which was based on the once hugely popular and addictive smartphone game series of the same name, which was first created by Finnish video game company Rovio Entertainment back in December 2009, with a basic and simple premise where you use a slingshot to launch a flock of colourful, angry birds at various structures in order to take down an army of green pigs and retrieve their stolen eggs, which has spawned countless spin-offs, including Angry Birds Seasons, Angry Birds Space, Angry Birds Go, Angry Birds Epic, Angry Birds Rio, Angry Birds Trilogy, Angry Birds Transformers, Angry Birds 2, Angry Birds Star Wars, and Angry Birds Star Wars 2, a ridiculous merchandising brand to rival that of both Star Wars and Disney combined, including Angry Birds t-shirts, Angry Birds bedspreads / pillowcases, Angry Birds posters, Angry Birds lunchboxes, Angry Birds comic books, Angry Birds umbrellas, Angry Birds pencil cases, Angry Birds rucksacks, Angry Birds Lego sets, an Angry Birds theme park, etc, 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 and even a successful animated TV series simply titled Angry Birds Toons, which this movie was partially made in response to. It was produced by Rovio Entertainment in collaboration with Sony Pictures Imageworks. It was the directorial debut for animation veterans Clay Kaytis and Fergal Reilly, Reilly being a storyboard artist for the likes of Space Jam, Quest for Camelot, The Iron Giant, Osmosis Jones, Stuart Little 2, Spider-Man 2, The Haunted Mansion, Hotel Transylvania, The Smurfs, Open Season, Pooh's Heatherlump Movie, and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and Kaytis being a long-time animator for Disney, with credits including Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan, Fantasia 2000, The Emperor's New Groove, Treasure Planet, Chicken Little, Meet the Robinsons, Home on the Range, Bolt, Tangled, Frozen, and Wreck-It Ralph. It was written by John Vitti, who not only previously wrote some of the classic Simpsons episodes, as well as the first Ice Age movie, the US version of The Office, some episodes of King of the Hill, and sketches for The Ali G Show and SNL. But he was also responsible for writing the first two Alvin and the Chipmunks movies, and he was also one of the 11 writers that were involved with writing the Simpsons movie almost 10 years ago. And it features the voice talents of Jason Sudeikis, Josh Gad, aka the voice of Olaf the Snowman in Frozen, Danny McBride, Maya Rudolph of Bridesmaids fame, Kate McKinnon, who was most recently in the new Ghostbusters remake, Bill Hader, Peter Dinklage, Blake Shelton, Keegan Michael Key of Key and Peele fame, Tituss Burgess of Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt fame, Hannibal Buress, Tony Hale, Alex Borstein, aka the voice of Lois Griffin in Family Guy, and Sean Penn. Yes, guys, I'm going to get to that later on in the review. This film was originally going to be released on the 1st of July 2016, but in order to avoid extreme competition with the likes of Warner Brothers' The Legend of Tarzan and Disney's live-action adaptation of Roald Dahl's The BFG, Sony moved the release date up to May 13th here in the UK and May 20th in the US. The story of the Angry Birds movie not only serves as an origin story, but it also serves as pretty much a prequel to the original game that attempts to explain why the birds are so, well, angry, and also how the conflict between the birds and the pigs that we all know from playing the game on our smartphones began. And it is centered around the character of Red, voiced by Jason Sudeikis, who lives on an island that is entirely populated by happy-go-lucky, peaceful, carefree, flightless birds. Red has always had a problem with controlling his anger. He hasn't really enjoyed life on a regular basis, and he has always treated everyone else around him like crap, largely because they have been treating him like crap due to them poking fun at his large Groucho Marx-style eyebrows when he was a child. So when he gets involved in a mishap whilst working as a cake delivery clown, he is sentenced to undergo anger management class. where he meets the class tutor Matilda, voiced by Maya Rudolph, who is secretly struggling to suppress some anger issues of her own. The hyper-fast banana-shaped Chuck, voiced by Josh Gad. The literally explosive Bomb, voiced by Danny McBride. And the monosyllabic grunting giant Terrence, voiced by none other than Sean freaking Penn. Around this time, a band of mysterious green pigs, led by Leonard, voiced by Bill Hader, visit the island posing as peacekeepers, and Red finds himself the only bird on the island who is suspicious of what the pigs are really up to. So he enlists the help of Chuck and Bomb to try and spring the legendary Mighty Eagle, voiced by Peter Dinklage, out of retirement so that he can help them defeat the pigs and retrieve their stolen eggs. Now, before I had the real misfortune of suffering through this movie with my lovely girlfriend Kirsty at our local cinema over 4 months ago now, I initially wasn't expecting to see a movie like this, at all this year, especially considering the fact that this is a movie based on a, in my opinion, ridiculously overrated smartphone game, which on paper seemed like a blatant cash grab and further proof that Hollywood had completely run dry of original ideas. And this is coming from someone who has heard of the games from a few college friends of mine, but was never a true fan of them, in all honesty, nor even cared really about their ridiculous appeal. But I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to go into this film with an open mind, make my own individual opinion on the film, and just get the experience of seeing the film over and done with. So after having been to see the Angry Birds movie way back in May, what are my thoughts on it? Honestly, guys, while there are only a few things about the film that I did like, which I'm going to get into in a moment, that doesn't necessarily change the fact that I couldn't help but feel just indifferent towards this movie whilst I was watching it. And it's such a shame for me to actually say this, because this should easily have been a surprisingly good movie, like how May Gray Sets a Trap surprised me way back early that same month, when I was initially expecting nothing from that movie. But for some godforsaken reason, nothing about this movie seemed to really, click with me or even interest me in any particular way. In fact, I remember just sitting there with my girlfriend next to me in the screening we were in for this movie, with nothing but this blank and emotionless look on my face, almost as if I had turned into one of the Vulcans out of Star Trek, and not even cracking a single smile or laughing out loud once throughout the entire running time whilst I was watching the movie. And I shit you not, guys, this is not by any means a good film, nor does it even come close to the technical brilliance of, say, Pixar or DreamWorks, or even something like the Lego Movie, which, by the way, I have seen this crap being hugely compared with. However, I wouldn't go as far as to say that this was one of the absolute worst animated films I've ever seen, like Norm of the North, or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer the movie, or Secret of Nim 2, or even Food Fight. Let's get some of the positives out of the way first, shall we? For a movie based on a smartphone game, the animation was very nice and damn impressive to look at, and it seemed like the animators put a lot of hard work and effort into making this film look visually gorgeous on the big screen. The incidental score by Hito Pereira, I think that's how you pronounce his name, was semi-decent, and I especially loved his epic and much more cinematic sounding rendition of the Angry Birds theme tune at the beginning of the film. Need I say more? Out of all the voice actors, Jason Sudeikis as Red was the only one who sounded like he was at least trying to give a decent vocal performance. And speaking of Red, he was the only character throughout this entire movie that I actually found myself relating to. Although I can't deny that there were other times where his character got really annoying, and some of his Chevy Chase / Bill Murray-esque cynicism actually grew tiresome rather quickly. And I also admired how, especially in the third act, the filmmakers at least tried to stay true to the mechanics of the original game, even if it was just for only 5 minutes of the entire movie, which in and of itself felt like a pointless afterthought, and it's massively disappointing if you are or were a hardcore fan of the games. Now on to the negatives. Where to plucking begin? The story completely reeked of unoriginality, and it was the same boring, tired, predictable, lazy, and generic underdog story that we've already seen being told to death a gazillion times before. Just stop it, Hollywood. Seriously, is it really that hard nowadays in the film industry to at least come up with an original idea for a story? The screenplay was all over the place, and the film looked like it was constantly being rewritten as it went along. It was almost as if the writers were trying to make a movie based on, you guessed it, a smartphone game. One that barely had any semblance of a story to begin with, but they were given a ridiculously paper-thin premise to work with, and were really running out of material to benefit a running time of 97 minutes. Speaking of the running time, even though it seemed to last almost as long as a modern Disney film like Wreck-It Ralph or a Pixar film like Inside Out, this film felt like it went on for 2 hours because of how terrible the pacing was. And I couldn't help but feel just a bit bored out of my mind. I also thought that the message this film was trying to convey to its audience, that it's okay to be angry, that it's okay to openly express any negative emotions that you feel, and to always stay true to your emotions, which I'm pretty sure, by the way, was handled much better in Inside Out last year, and that it's remotely acceptable to be racist and xenophobic towards other people, just came across as really patronising and actually quite distasteful. It was almost as if either John Vitti himself, or even one of the writers, who probably was not just a secret Donald Trump supporter, but was also probably a secret fan of Nigel Farage and UKIP's shady as hell policies, somehow felt the need to constantly shove this message down our throats just to prove a point, especially given that we are currently living in a politically and economically unstable world where we in Great Britain are threatening to leave the European Union because of the immigration crisis, which is still an ongoing problem to this day, whilst at the same time our American neighbours across the pond are seriously considering electing Donald J. Trump himself as their next president. But I digress. I mean, seriously, what the hell were they trying to teach young kids with such a message that is this downright bullshit, crass, asinine, disgusting, and just and just insanely idiotic and Neanderthal. I mean, wow. Aside from perhaps Red, the other characters in this film were so annoying. And it was made even worse by the voice acting from what was otherwise a hugely talented comedic voice cast. I mean, you had Josh Gad, Danny McBride, Maya Rudolph, Bill Hader, Keegan Michael Key, Kate McKinnon, Hannibal Buress, and even Peter freaking Dinklage. And they were all, for the most part, just totally wasted here. Danny McBride sounded okay, I guess, as Bomb. Bill Hader sounded like he was completely hamming it up as Leonard. Maya Rudolph as Matilda, Kate McKinnon as Stella, who, by the way, served as nothing more than a walking reference to the game, and Keegan Michael Key as Judge Peckinpah, a brilliant name for a bird, by the way, I have to admit, all sounded like they were completely phoning in their vocal performances. Peter Dinklage was terribly wasted here as the Mighty Eagle, who, by the way, reminded me of a mixture between Baloo from the Jungle Book and Metro Man from Megamind, but without any of the likability or charm. Now, don't get me wrong, Peter Dinklage does have potential to be a great voice actor, but seriously, Hollywood? What is your problem with typecasting him as the buffoon in these really terrible movies, animated or otherwise? Well, apart from Elf, The Station Agent, and of course Game of Thrones. First Ice Age Continental Drift, then Pixels, and now Angry Birds. Wow. Josh Gad sounded like he didn't want to be here, and you know what? I don't really blame him, because apparently he initially didn't want to do this film because he rightly feared his role as Chuck in this film would be too similar to his role as Olaf in Frozen, and in my honest opinion, he should have really stuck to his guns. Had Rovio and Sony not bribed him with that half-hour visual pitch, or even probably forced him to do this movie at gunpoint or by blackmail, because they were probably jealous and resentful of how successful Disney were, and they desperately wanted some of that Frozen money. Also, the way Josh Gad portrayed Chuck in this movie, or rather the way the character himself was portrayed in this movie, whether it be how he was written or how he was animated, was pretty much Olaf if he was on crack, mixed with Daffy Duck, Sonic the Hedgehog, Quagmire from Family Guy, and Quicksilver from the X-Men films. Speaking of which, and I shit you not, there is a direct rip-off of a certain Quicksilver scene from X-Men Days of Future Past in this film. Let that sink in for a moment. And what's even worse is that it makes me all the more worried for how his performance as LeFou in Disney's upcoming live-action remake of Beauty and the Beast next year is going to turn out. On a side note, to this day, I for one strongly refuse to accept the idea that the voice of Terrence in this movie was actually Sean Penn, because even if Sean Penn did agree to secretly take part in this movie for a cheap paycheck, it would still be a criminal and disgraceful waste of his tremendous talent, especially when you consider the fact that the guy has 2 Best Actor Oscars under his belt for Mystic River and Milk. B, if you watched the first 2 trailers for this movie very closely, you may or may not have noticed that Sean Penn's name didn't feature anywhere whatsoever on the cast list to those trailers. And I actually have a crazy little theory that the reason for this is because either Sony or Rovio or both studios probably already hired a secret unnamed voice actor for Terrence, but they didn't want any potential audiences to notice, and ended up running around like the headless chickens on Xanax that they are, because they had next to no idea what to do. So the only way they thought they could cover this up was just to slap Sean Penn's name on there before they got round to editing the 3rd trailer, which leads me to believe that C, all of this was nothing more than a cheap publicity stunt on Sony's part, probably because they were so desperate to place the bums of an adult audience as well as kids on those seats by adding some real star power onto the cast list. And also D, the character of Terrence could have been voiced by pretty much anyone other than Sean Penn, whether it be an unnamed Rovio employee, an unnamed Sony employee, or even veteran voice artist Frank Welker, because all that Terrence does throughout this entire movie is just grunt and growl non-verbally. Like, As well as do a bit of opera singing towards the end, almost in a vaguely similar fashion to Groot in Guardians of the Galaxy, or Baymax in Big Hero 6, or even the title character in The Iron Giant. Despite admitting to chuckling quite a few times, I thought the humour in this film was just terrible, and especially the potty humour. I mean, case especially in point being the infamous scene that was almost pretty much given away in one of the trailers, where Chuck and Bomb have been drinking and swimming in the Mighty Eagle's Lake of Wisdom, only for it to later turn out to be his private urinal, and the Mighty Eagle comes out of his cave, does this superhero type pose with his wings, and then literally proceeds to pee in the lake for an entire minute. When that scene happened, I remember the audience at the screening I was in laughing their heads off as if they just turned into the hyenas from The Lion King, whilst I just sat there face palming and thinking to myself, what the pluck is an adult joke like this doing in a film that is supposed to be aimed squarely at young kids? Now, don't get me wrong, I am all for adult jokes in animated comedies and or family films, as long as they are executed with intelligence and class, like in the Toy Story films, or Zootropolis, or the Shrek films, or even The Simpsons. But this particular joke felt like it was written to appeal to the lowest common denominator. It was almost as if it was originally written by Seth MacFarlane to be one of the cutaway jokes in an episode of Family Guy, but it was probably rejected by Fox because they either thought that the joke didn't work or felt that it was a little bit too crude for their liking. The countless bird and pig-related puns, as well as the pop culture references and licensed musical numbers that they used throughout this movie, were just some of the most pointless and obnoxious I had ever seen in a mainstream animated film. In fact, they were almost as pointless and obnoxious as the ones in Shark Tale. That's how bad they were. Hell, I wouldn't even be surprised if the same writer for Shark Tale, Michael J. Wilson, secretly wrote both this film and Ice Age collision course at the same time. I mean, there was stuff like Pluck My Love. Have you ever heard of Bird Control? Amnesty International, Daft Pig, Kevin Bacon in Hamlet, John Hamm, Instaham, Calvin Swine, 50 Shades of Green, the Rick Astley classic Never Gonna Give You Up, and a sugar-coated Demi Lovato rendition of I Will Survive featured on the soundtrack, and the worst offender being a pointless reference to the iconic scene from The Shining when we see the Grady twins for the first time. Firstly, this reference came straight out of nowhere. Secondly, it had next to nothing whatsoever to do with the story or the rest of the film. Thirdly, younger kids are not going to be able to know what the hell The Shining is, so this reference is going to go way over their heads. And fourthly, they couldn't even nail the reference correctly. The Grady twins didn't utter the words red rum, red rum. Instead they said, come play with us, Danny. Come play with us. It was almost like Stephen Moffat had a secret hand somehow in deliberately botching this reference within the screenplay in order to actively try and piss off the same fans who dared to criticise his disastrous writing for Hell Bent last year, in pretty much a similar fashion to George Lucas deliberately making these constant, unnecessary changes to the original Star Wars trilogy with the special editions to piss off the same fans who didn't take too kindly to what he did with the prequels and Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I'm actually surprised that no other reviewer has brought this up, but I cannot help but get the feeling that this film seemed to suffer from almost the exact same problem that I had with the first Planes movie, in that it felt like a 97-minute long toy advert that was purely designed to entice younger kids who have never even heard of Angry Birds before in their lives to play the games. And it also felt like a project that was made by committee, that was moulded by a group of people from both Sony and Rovio, sitting in a large room, doing the maths, and thinking they can come up with whatever the hell they wanted, just to see what idea stuck, so that they could make a shit ton of money out of it, without giving two shits about producing a good narrative or developing interesting characters. And it's perfectly understandable why Rovio would be so desperate to churn out a movie like this based off of this one brand that's still keeping them relevant to this day. And it's because of the sad fact that nobody plays Angry Birds anymore. Nobody talks about Angry Birds anymore. The craze is about to die out, and Rovio itself is about to shut its doors. So of course they would want to keep the brand alive by preserving it on the big screen as a big budget animated movie, which they're probably hoping will lead to a franchise. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that I'm defending Rovio as a mainstream video game corporation and as a business, because I have seen quite a few videos that happen to feature those who work for Rovio, as they've worked the best that they possibly could to promote this gaming franchise over the years. And the way the company comes across, to me anyways, is sort of like Anakin Skywalker in the prequels, at least before he becomes Darth Vader, if that makes any sense. And all of this perfectly demonstrates to me how creatively bankrupt, creatively lazy, way in over their heads, not so much arrogant or narcissistic, incredibly cocky, incredibly overconfident, incredibly overambitious, and incredibly self-deluded Rovio really are, especially when you take into account that their end game is to have as much of a hugely successful multi-billion-dollar empire, if not more so, than Disney. And I am dead serious when I say this. Rovio are so on their high horse, they think they are smart, clever, and flexible enough to try and do way too much with this franchise to the most ridiculous of extremes. But the problem is that it's not doing them any real favours commercially, critically, and financially. And ultimately, they're going down the same sorry path as Blue Sky Studios with their Ice Age films. The only people I can see myself recommending this movie to will be those who used to, and or probably still are, addicted to the games. And kids are going to enjoy it because of the bright colours and the gorgeous animation. But adults are going to be left out in the cold and rolling their eyes eyes at the dubious pop culture references and the sophomoric humour. And if you're expecting something like the Lego Movie, or Zootropolis, or Toy Story, or Ice Age, or Shrek, you're going to be left sorely disappointed. In conclusion, like the smartphone game it was based on, the Angry Birds movie was just such a time waster. When Kirsty and I got out of our screening, I remember almost not saying a single word to her, at least until a couple of minutes after we left the cinema. I was so speechless, so mortified, so bitterly disappointed, and so silently angry, pardon the pun again, because I just couldn't believe what the hell we just watched and how much money and time we wasted on it. Speaking of which, I actually felt really bad for Kirsty because, unlike me, she had to pay some of her own money for a cinema ticket for us to go and see this piece of bird droppings. And for all we know, Rovio and Sony are probably swimming in that money. I'm honestly getting really sick and tired talking about this plucking movie any further than I have. I just really don't want to give it the time of day, and for all I know, I've probably already wasted over half an hour's worth of both your time and my time talking about it to you in this video. And I'm gonna cut straight to the chase. I'm going to make a first on this channel and give the Angry Birds movie an overall rating of 4 out of 10. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just extremely mediocre and middle of the road. And really, all that's left for me to say is, pluck the Angry Birds movie, pluck Rovio, pluck Sony, and use a slingshot to catapult them all the way to piggy hell. Now, feel free to leave a comment in the section below, and please let me know your thoughts on the Angry Birds movie. Plus, feel free to subscribe to my channel as always. And until my next video, which is going to be my long-awaited special super rant on the X Factor, do take care, everyone, and goodbye.